Madam Secretary, thanks for the time. The July 4th, 2026 will celebrate the 250th birthday of the country, and American greatness is going to be on display, definitely, but it's also on trial. And I'm doing this project, The Case for America, as if making the case why America is a great place, especially at this anniversary. You know, in your memoir, you speak of your extraordinary, ordinary family. Isn't that kind of the American story? Ordinary people doing extraordinary things?
That is absolutely the American story. And it's extraordinary that in this environment, you find people who do it against all kinds of circumstances that we would otherwise think were really crippling. That's really the American story, is that these people take the freedom that we are given as Americans, the fact that we're allowed to chart our own course, and they then, whatever their circumstances, they manage to achieve amazing things. And so what I've always loved about America is that you're not prisoner of either your circumstances of your birth. I mean, how many stories do we have of CEOs of major companies that in one case I grew up in a Section 8 government project housing? How many cases do we have of people who came here with nothing from another country, and within a generation, not only are they American, but their kids are wildly successful? And so it is that ordinary people do extraordinary things. But I think as we celebrate our anniversary, we have to realize that it's also because we were given certain freedoms, and that's why we're able to do what we do.
You once said the essence of America, that which really unites us, is not ethnicity or nationality or religion. It's an idea. And what an idea is that you can come from humble circumstances and do great things. So that's really to your point that you're making there.
That's right, because I hear so many times, well, this could only have happened in America. And I think, well, what does that mean? Well, it means that we do not believe that somehow you are born to it, or that somehow where you were born or where you came from is going to limit who you can be. And I often say, Bret, that America is 300 million individual stories like that. But we also have one collective story. And that collective story is about the power of freedom, the power of individual liberty, the power of resilience, the power of being able to see your world and your life as you want it to be, not as it is. So that's our collective story. And I hope what we'll celebrate in this period is that these individual stories add up to something very special.
You also grew up in a time when to be African American meant being conscious of the American dream and its failure at that time to include people like you. And so you were kind of shaped by both struggle and opportunity. Can you talk about that, your personal story like that?
I'm really fortunate that I grew up in a community in Birmingham, Alabama, that was not going to let the limitations of Birmingham and Jim Crow be limitations of their kids. They just were doggedly determined that way. Now, I also have to remind people that, I was a kid of educators. My parents were teachers. My dad was a high school guidance counselor. I'm actually not even the first PhD in my family. My aunt was the PhD in Victorian literature.
Wow.
She wrote books on Dickens. And so how did she get to the University of Wisconsin in 1952 and get a PhD? So I had those role models that basically said, all right, yes, you can't go to a Woolworths and have a hamburger. Yes, you can't go to a movie theater. Yes, Kittyland, which was an amusement park, is off limits to you. But they never said, because of those things, you're somehow a lesser person. They said, you will overcome those things if you are tough-minded, if you work hard, and if you don't fall prey to thinking of yourself as a victim. Because if you think of yourself as a victim, you have given control of your life to someone else. And so I think for those reasons, Birmingham, while it certainly has constraints and its limitations, turned not to have the effect that maybe it could have without those messages from our parents. And my parents weren't the only ones. Our whole little community was that way in Birmingham.
You served in an administration during a period of crisis. There was times, obviously, after 9/11 when the nation came together in tremendous unity. A lot of people talk about 9/12 and how much unity there was on 9/12. There were other times, though, when the nation was really divided. Talk about the challenge of balancing those two in really the same administration.
We tried, and President Bush really was determined about this, that he believed that, yes, it was important that the country be united, but he didn't want it to be united permanently in fear. I remember driving to the National Prayer Service that Friday, and there was a man holding a sign along Massachusetts Avenue, you know that route, and it said, "God bless America, we will not be terrorized." And the whole idea was that the administration should take the burden of trying to keep the next attack from happening, and that was very, very hard. But we've sometimes been criticized, the president's been criticized about not mobilizing the country at that moment around that sense of pride, around that sense of what it was to be American, in the way that, the analogies all the way, in the way we were mobilized around World War II. But he felt, and I think it was wise, that we didn't want America to be in a constant state of fear about terrorism. We wanted America to go on with its, with Americans to go on with their life. I remember, Bret, that on September 12th, around the table, all of these agencies that would not have been around a national security table on September 10th, the people who did border control, the FBI, the transportation secretary, because we hadn't been attacked on the territory of the United States since the War of 1812. So suddenly we had every round around what it meant to be attacked internally. But I remember the first thing the president said to the Secretary of Treasury is, how fast can we get the banks back up? And I thought, well, that's a strange question. But he wanted Americans to go on. Now, maybe we paid a price for that, in that moment of unity dissipated as debates began about what the policies were. Debates began about not so much Afghanistan, but about Iraq and what we were doing there, as the president tried to pursue a domestic agenda around Social Security and the like. And so that moment of maximum unity did dissipate, but I think it was still the right call not to have the American people live in constant fear.
Yeah. You've said that the United States doesn't have a choice but to assume leadership in the world and world affairs. And this is something you've talked about a lot. You believe strongly. I've talked to you about it before. What's the greatest opportunity we have for practicing that leadership today?
We have some very direct moments right now. Some of them we've exercised. I have to say, I think the decision to support the Israelis in trying to at least set back the Iranian nuclear program was a signal to everybody that even if the President of the United States talked about America first, it didn't mean sitting on our hands when we could do something about the international system and about the challenges. We have a big opportunity in the way that we deal with China to come from our strengths, our distributed innovation, our scientific inquiry, which I hope we will continue through universities and the like, through the way that as a people we mobilize to take on this challenge. But I also think Ukraine may be the biggest one right now. It's pretty unusual to have as bald-faced an aggression as we saw with Vladimir Putin's aggression against Ukraine. A large country literally trying to extinguish its smaller neighbor. And if we believe in anything in the United States in terms of the way the international system operates, it's that might can't make right in that way. And so I'm grateful that we've continued to work with Ukraine. I'm grateful that, yes, the war needs to end, but needs to end in a particular way. And I would just remind everyone that the reason I often say we have no choice but to lead is that great powers don't mind their own business. They try to shape the international system, and either we shape it or somebody else shapes it. And I think for a host of reasons, going back to what we talked about in terms of our values and the way Americans have succeeded, we want to be the ones to shape the international system, not China, not Russia, and certainly not just the chaos of the law of the jungle, which has too often been the nature of international politics.
If you were asked to make the case for America, what would the argument that you would make be?
If I were asked to make the case for America, I might tell a little vignette, if that's all right. And as we've been discussing, I was the child of the segregated South, fortunately with parents who were determined not to let that matter. But on the day that I was sworn in as Secretary of State, I stood in the Franklin room of the State Department. And I looked up, I kind of glanced up at this portrait of Benjamin Franklin. And I thought, what would old Ben have thought of this? Here is this black woman from the South, the segregated South, taking an oath of allegiance to a constitution that once counted her ancestors as 3/5 of a man, promising to protect and defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And oh, by the way, sworn in by a Jewish woman Supreme Court justice named Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was my neighbor. And of course, he would never have imagined it. And I wouldn't have as a little girl in Birmingham, and Ruth when she was just trying to get her voice heard in law school. And so the case for America is not that America is perfect. The case for America is we keep striving. We keep trying on the basis of our values and the basis of our resilience and the basis of our belief in one another to make that more perfect union. And it is never going to be done as our work. It has to continue. But that is the case for America. And I have been all over the world. I've visited a lot of countries, many of which I love. But there is nothing like the United States of America. And that's the case for it.
That's great. I mean, the world is still trying to get here, too. We see a lot of people striving all the time to try to get to America.
And whether they are people who come here to fuel the information revolution. I've often said, and he would say it, that people like Sergey Brin, who came here from Russia at 7, he doesn't found Google in Russia. He founds it because he's a student at Stanford. He meets Larry Page. They have this idea. It happens in America. I also think that even people who maybe come here to make $50 should make $5, not 50 cents, they're part of that story too. And so we have something very special, and it's why there are lines at every American consulate trying to get in, and not many at Chinese consulates.
Do you think the American dream has changed? Are people more pessimistic that it reaches everybody? How do we think the American dream?
We go through periods of pessimism. Look, we're kind of an unruly bunch, the Americans. It's kind of cacophonous here. But there is one piece that I worry about, which is as the economy has become more complicated, more sophisticated over the years, as the $18 an hour unskilled labor job has gone away, I'm not sure that our educational system has kept pace. There are too many people who really don't have a chance, and I think we all feel that. I've said, Bret, that I think we need a kind of human capital initiative. No more third graders who can't read. Right? If you can't read by the time you're third grade, you're not going to read. How would you like to try to get a job in this economy when you can't read? No more 21-year-olds who have finished college with a lot of debt and an unusable degree, when they might have been better off to go and take a trade. And do we give that opportunity? No more 35-year-olds who can't be retrained, because the one thing that we know is that that no set of skills is really going to be evergreen. You're going to have to keep reskilling and reskilling. But I especially worry about kids who are in unfortunate circumstances. I've always been a great believer in parental choice in schools, allowing parents to have better options, because the truth is we have a choice system. If you are of means, you will send your kids to schools where you will buy a house in a district where the schools are good and houses are expensive. Palo Alto is one of those places. If you are really well off, you'll send your kids to private schools. So who's really stuck with no choice? Poor kids, where I can look at your zip code and I can tell where they're going to get a good education. That is not the American dream. And those kids will never realize the America that we've been talking about. And so I spend a lot of my time and a lot of my energy and a lot of what we do here at the Hoover Institution is to try to find ways, yes, to make the public schools better, but also to give poor parents more choices. Because it's not that they don't care, it's that they don't have good choices.
And to your point earlier, it's that we're still striving.
We're still striving, and we have many problems that we have to fix. But I'll take my bet on the United States to be better at it in ways that will continue to refresh the American dream and refresh America's and Americans' belief in who we are. But we also need to celebrate it. One reason that I'm looking forward to this anniversary of 250 is you have to continually acknowledge and celebrate. And maybe we have gotten a little down on ourselves. Maybe we've started to think about our history in ways that are really not really true to the history. Yeah, American history is complicated. But American history also has a lot of stories of overcoming. And that's what I hope will animate all of us as we try to celebrate this incredible 250 years.
That's great. Let me ask you about this meeting in Alaska. President Trump, Vladimir Putin meeting in Anchorage. If you were advising President Trump, knowing what you know about Vladimir Putin and about Russia, what would you tell him ahead of this meeting?
Well, first, he's got some pretty good people advising him, so let me just start there. But I think recognizing that President Trump, has really set the conditions that Putin, in a sense, needs him more than he needs Putin. Yes, he needs Putin to stop this war, but he holds the options, which he's articulated, of putting more pressure on a Russian economy that is really in pretty dire straits when the Russians themselves, through their very fine central bankers, start to talk about the dark problems that the Russian economy has. I think maybe people are trying to say, even Russians are trying to say to Vladimir Putin, we can't fight this war forever. Secondly, I think that you have the possibilities with the Russians to say to them, we are not going to do this over the heads of the Ukrainians because they have fought too hard. And that means that there's nothing wrong with having a discussion with Putin, but nothing can be a proposal that looks like an American-Russian proposal on how this war stops. The Europeans are going to be critical to whatever ceasefire eventually obtains. The Europeans are going to really be critical to making it work. And so they need to be consulted. They need to be at the table. But most of all, given what Ukraine has suffered and given the terrorism, and that's the only thing you can call what Russia's doing with the bombings and the drones against civilian populations is, you can call it terrorism. The Ukrainians deserve the chance to determine their own future. Now, I'd be the first to say, I think this war does need to stop. And it may have to stop with some inconclusive elements on how the territory will eventually look. I think Ukraine can be rebuilt. I think their defense industries are quite remarkable. They can continue to hold at risk things that the Russians care about, as they showed in what they did against the strategic bombing force. So let's not think of the Ukrainians as having no cards. They do have cards. And let's not think of the Russians as having all the cards. They don't have all the cards. And if you go in with that mentality, I think this will come out just fine.
Because, again, knowing Putin, why do you think he agrees to this sit down? From a place of concern or for a place of trying to get his way in that room one-on-one?
Oh, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I do think he's concerned. Look, I wondered at the beginning of the Trump administration when I don't know if this was true, but things were flying around about, well, Crimea will be yours, or, there'll be a territorial settlement, and no, Ukraine will never be in NATO, and all of that was sort of being said by various elements of the administration. I thought, well, why doesn't Putin take that deal? And I think he just has a hard time accepting that he can't crush Ukraine, a country that he doesn't actually believe is a country. He told us it was a made-up country. And so he didn't take the opportunity. But now with the threats against the Russian economy, with the shot across the bow about secondary sanctions, maybe it's starting to occur to him that he needs to stop this war. But he's certainly trying to deflect any action that the president might take. And so maybe he hopes that going into the room, he can once again use words to convince the president that he still wants peace. But I would just hope that the president remembers what he said very eloquently, that he got off the phone with Putin and they bombed Ukraine that night. That's the true Vladimir Putin.
Madam Secretary, really appreciate the time.
Thank you.